Hello, this is Miss Bojanowski. I wanted to give you our second lecture this week, which is on AmyTan's A Pair of Tickets. And before we get into the short story, I wanted to review the author and the biography. Instead of going through that website, what I did is just put together a PowerPoint for you that will just kind of look at her as an author. And let me just show it to you from the beginning. Okay, so one thing you should know about AmyTan, she always talks about the diaspora, this living between two cultures. She herself is the first generation American in her family. She was born in Oakland, California, 1952. Both of her parents emigrated from China. Both of them were actually fleeing wars, but they were just fleeing different wars. And you should know that her mother, Daisy Tan, she did leave behind three daughters as she was trying to escape the communist takeover in 1949. So, one theme that is prominent in Amy Tan's work is mother daughter relationships. You should know that Tan herself was estranged from her mother. This is Daisy Tan over here. And for 6 years, they just didn't talk. It was after her mother suffered a stroke that Tan really recognized the need for reconciliation. They did kind of put aside their differences. And in 1987, just 2 years before this short story was written, both Daisy Tan, Amy Tan's mother, and her, they went to China. They went to Shanghai and Beijing, and they did meet with the stepsisters, Amy Tan's stepsisters, the three daughters that were left behind. So there are certainly some parallels between the short story and Amy Tan's life, but there are some very distinct differences, namely this one right here, that changes everything, that she went to China with her mother. So please don't argue that the story is autobiographical. It's not. That's a major difference that you just can't overcome. The major works for Amy Tan are listed here, but the first one is the most notable, The Joy Luck Club. That is a novel that houses 16 short stories, and we're reading the last short story, and it was written in 1989. But you can see that Amy Tan continues to write, and this is the last of her novels, 2013. With the Joy Luck Club, the book really is divided into 16 different chapters. You have four mothers that all are emigrating from China, and then you have four daughters who are all first generation American. And so the chapters are divided two, really, for each of the women. And it says the themes that unite the 16 chapters are the Chinese heritage and the cultural duality. They don't want to negate being Chinese, the mothers, when they come to America. And the daughters don't want to give up their American identity as they try to learn the Chinese heritage that their mothers are trying to give them. Okay, so this is a picture from the Joy Luck Club. You can see that you've got the four daughters and the four mothers here. It was actually made into a film. And one of the themes that we have is what we call liminal characters. And these are characters that kind of have this tug of war between two cultures where they're trying to figure out who they are, their sense of identity. And they're usually in a sense of conflict, sometimes psychological, sometimes physical, but they always feel that they've lost or missing some part of themselves, and they're always trying to come to terms with that sense of loss and really find this complete sense of self, this peace that they aspire to. So we're going to see that Zhang Mei is definitely first generation American. She has been told all of her life through her mother that she is Chinese. And so really there kind of is that conflict between the two cultures, and she needs to negotiate being American but also accepting this Chinese identity. So that's all we have for that one. And so without any further ado, let's kind of talk about the short story. We will see from the research that we went over with the diaspora, there is a loss of identity, again, being tug of war between the American and Chinese culture. And we'll see at the beginning of the short story, she really doesn't belong to either. We will see when she's 15 years old, tender age of 15 years old, she does identify as being American. And she really, when she's an adult, I think she's 34, she will learn to accept her Chinese heritage, but it's a long journey. And we're going to look at some significant stops along the way. So when we come into the readings for week 3, I did link you to the Google Books. That kind of allows me for copyright reasons to include it, but I gave you this PDF file just in case, because sometimes with Google Books, they don't show you the complete chapter. So feel free to go ahead and download that, and that's what I have right here. So this is the title page. You can see it comes from the novel The Joy Luck Club by AmyTan. The next page, the only thing I need you to take from it is this part right here, 1989. That was when the novel was published. And then I just bring you into our chapter, which is a pair of tickets. Now, one thing you should know is that in a short story, the first paragraph really will give you the theme of the short story, the central conflict. If you read the first paragraph and you don't get the theme or the central conflict, you need to reread it because I promise you it's there. So here we have, the minute our train leaves the Hong Kong border and enters Shenzhen, China, I feel different. I can feel the skin on my forehead tingling, my blood rushing through a new course, my bones aching with a familiar old pain, and I think my mother was right. I am becoming Chinese. And so the first sentence gives us a sense that she's leaving one country and entering into the other, and she is crossing a border. That's a physical border that she's crossing, but it's also a psychological border that she's crossing. And she says that when she's crossing this border, she feels different. Then we have this metaphor in the second paragraph. And with a metaphor, remember, it's when something concrete represents an idea or something abstract. So she says, I can feel the skin on my forehead tingling. I've never felt the skin on my forehead tingling, but I can tell you that behind my forehead is my brain. And if it's tingling, that means that there's some kind of motion or kinetic activity. So it seems like something is shifting in her mind. Okay, that's what the metaphor seems to be going with. And then it says, my blood rushing through a new course. Well, we know that blood is your life force. Okay. Hopefully it is not going through different arteries and veins because that would be problematic, but it's going through a new direction. So her life force seems to be going through a new direction. And then we go even further into the anatomy and we have the bones. That's your skeleton, your foundation. And it says, my bones aching with a familiar old pain. She's never been to China before. How can her bones be aching with a familiar old pain? We know that bones usually are linked to ancestry, and it's almost like they're recognizing that they're coming back to this ancestry that she originally came from. Okay, so that's just one interpretation of it, but we can certainly see that she's in a state of transition, and she does acknowledge that she is becoming Chinese, but this is just the first step on that long journey. That's in sharp contrast with the very next paragraph where she only identifies at the tender age of 15 as being American. She says when she was 15 and had vigorously denied that I had any Chinese whatsoever below my skin, I was a sophomore at Galileo High in San Francisco. All my Caucasian friends agreed I was about as Chinese as they were. So we all know that 15-year-olds know everything about the world and they can never be told differently. And so that's what she made up her mind. She was just American. She's also allowing other people, her Caucasian friends, to tell her who she is. So she's really not identifying herself. I think she's just trying to fit in. And it's really quite interesting because she wants desperately to not be like her mother, who identifies as being Chinese. And it's really cute because she has these weird sense of what being Chinese actually means. She says, when her mother says, someday you'll see it is in your blood waiting to be let go. That's really quite important because when we get to the end of the short story, that will come back up again. And Zhang Mei responds to that and said, when she said this, I saw myself transforming like a werewolf, a mutant tag of DNA suddenly triggered, replicating itself insidiously into a syndrome, a cluster of telltale Chinese behaviors, all of those things my mother did to embarrass me. Okay, so it's really kind of nightmarish for her to become Chinese, the being turned into a monster, this insidious replication of the DNA. And here is the horror of being Chinese. Nothing that I anticipated in my wildest dreams. Here are the three telltale signs: haggling with store owners, pecking her mouth with a toothpick in public. I don't think that the Chinese have a corner market on that one. And then being colorblind to the fact that lemon yellow and pale pink are not good combinations for winter clothes. So this is AmyTan showing us a young 15-year-old first generation American telling us what it means to be Chinese. And it is rather endearing because it is just not what you expect, and it's very innocent. So from that, we see that there is definitely a conflict between the 34-year-old self and the 15-year-old self that we have to resolve. To complicate matters, we see that she's 36 years old. My mother is dead. That's the conflict that she also has to resolve, because her stepsisters, who she didn't know she had stepsisters, have been found, and there's somebody in China who's trying to reunite these daughters with their mother in America, but unfortunately the mother is dead. And so they receive the letter. It's really quite tragic, and they don't want to tell these girls that the mother is dead. So one of the women with whom the mother played mahjong writes this letter to the sisters and said, "Dearest daughters, I too have never forgotten you in my memory or my heart. I never gave up hope that we would see each other again in joyous reunion. I am only sorry that it has been too long." Now that's horrible, because the daughters in China, the stepsisters, they're going to expect the mother to come off the plane, and it's going to be Zhang Mei, who they don't even know they have a stepsister in America. And Zhang Mei really feels the weight of this, and she's afraid of it. She says, they'll hate me as soon as they see me. And they said, they can't hate you. You are their only sister, their only family. And she said, you don't understand. And Zhang Mei whispers, they'll think I'm responsible, that she died because I didn't appreciate her. Well, that's a guilty complex if I've never seen it. So to complicate her not really understanding who she is, she also has this dilemma that she has to deal with as soon as she gets to China. Okay, and so we have like, these are like flashbacks that we have, and then we continue the trip that we're in China. And at first, when she's in Guangzhou, it's really interesting that here she is, first trip into China. She doesn't know what to expect. And at first, it kind of works up to her expectations, but then everything kind of drops off from there. And one central symbol that we have in the in the short story, is photographs. Okay, this one's actually quite poignant here on this page. Let me make sure I have the page number for you, for those of you following along. Page 270. Yep, yeah, page 270. So she has her passport, all right? Your passport says to the world, I'm American. And it's interesting because she doesn't feel like she's the same person that's in the passport as the holding the passport. She says, I take out the declaration forms to my passport. Wu, it says on the top, and below that, June May, who was born in California, USA, 1951. I wonder if the customs people will question whether I'm the same person as in the passport photo. In this picture, my chin-length hair is swept back and artfully styled. I am wearing false eyelashes, eyeshadow, and lip liner. My cheeks are hollowed out by bronze blusher, but I had not expected the heat in October. And now my hair hangs limp with the humidity. I wear no makeup. In Hong Kong, my mascara had melted into dark circles, and everything else had felt like layers of grease. So today my face is plain, unadorned, except for a thin mist of shiny sweat on my forehead and nose. So this passport that declares her as being American, she doesn't feel like she even is the same person in that picture. So we definitely see the shift here, and it's just like the first step on that journey to becoming Chinese. And she said, even without my makeup, I could never pass for true Chinese. I stand 5'6" and my head pokes above the crowd so that I am eye level only with other tourists. Well, that's very ironic. She's been told she's Chinese all of her life. She gets to China and she feels like a tourist because she's tall. She feels out of place. And so she has that to contend with. And it says, my mother once told me my height came from my grandfather, who was a northerner and may have even had some Mongol blood. This is what your grandmother once told me, explained my mother, but now it is too late to ask her. They are all dead. My grandparents, your uncles and their wives and children, all killed in the war when a bomb fell on our house. So many generations in one instant. And here we see the family's tragedy. This is the only part of her family that she knows from China, and it is very tragic. I think in America, we're kind of isolated and insulated from war. We don't know what it's like to have a bomb drop on a house and decimate an entire family in a blink of an eye. And she's kind of innocent. She said maybe they left the house before the bomb fell, and her mother said no. Our whole family is gone. It is just you and I. So when she's younger, she only knows this tragedy. Her mother really doesn't talk about her time in China, and she does not know about her stepsister. It's just you and I, okay? And so they continue their journey. They meet the extended family, which is basically the aunt on her mother's side, and it's really quite interesting. They have this exchange. The 72-year-old father is called a little wild goose, and they take pictures of each other, and that's really quite symbolic because we have a family from America being reunited with the rest of the family in China, and they really want to document everybody in the picture. This is our family and include everyone. There is a little bit of a breakdown in communication because they are communicating in Cantonese, which is a Chinese dialect, and so Zhang Mei feels a little bit out of place there. But Lily, the 10-year-old girl, is the one who kind of steals the show. When they first try to talk with one another, Zhang Mei says, hello, I say to the little girl. My name is Zhang Mei, but the little girl squirms and looks away because she doesn't understand her. And of course, she brings out the Polaroid camera. Those are the cameras that instantly give you the picture. And as soon as the camera comes out, she immediately jumps forward, places one hand on her hip in the manner of a fashion model, juts out her chest, and flashes a toothy smile. So they are able to bridge that communication gap and really kind of get to know each other. And there's just a sense of warmth, I think, in this scene of the short story. When they're going to the hotel, we really see that Zhang Mei is met with just these China just is not living up to what she expected it to be. She asked 2 times, this is communist China. The town that they're going through, Guangzhou, it's very modern. It's very urban and contemporary. It almost looks like an American city. And she even says that, a major American city with the high rises and construction going on. And she even gets upset when she comes to the hotel. She's like, I asked for, a economical hotel and it looks like a 5-star hotel. So she's really kind of caught off guard here. When she goes into her room, there's a mini bar, and this is everything that you would find in an American mini bar, and yet she's in China. And she asks again, this is communist China. But then they have dinner. She's in China. She gets to have her first real Chinese dinner, the good stuff. And of course, what does her family give her? Hamburgers, french fries, and apple pie a la mode. And so I'm sure she was a little disappointed with that. But this is a really nice gesture from her extended family. They know that she's in China, that everything is really unfamiliar to her, and they want to comfort her and really kind of make her feel at home in China. And so that's why they give her what she's familiar with, okay? She said basically the only thing that kind of lived up to her expectations of China was when she's in the shower and she has the shampoo, and it is the consistency and color of hoisin sauce, which is really tasty, but not something I would really want to put in my hair, okay? So after that initial meeting, they continue their journey on toward the stepsisters, and it's then where she really starts to learn who they are, and the father kind of translates their names, which is Xuan Hu and Xuan Hua. I'm very bad with Chinese pronunciations. Spring rain and spring flower, which is really kind of interesting. It does have a symbolic meaning. And then she asks you, what does Ma's name mean? And Suyan, he says, means long cherished wish. Okay, so that's really quite interesting too. And they kind of go through different translations of it, but all of these will be kind of symbolic. And then they tell her the story that she's never heard, that her mother never told her. It's a very significant story. She really needs to understand it. And she says, instead of saying it in English, no, tell me in Chinese. Really, I can understand. So when we look at her on this journey, she really seems to be opening up, to learn this story in Chinese, this really important story that she needs to know. We see that she's really progressing on this timeline. And so the tale is really tragic. The mother's fleeing her hometown because it's being raided during the war. She brings as much as she can so she can kind of barter on the way, because in times of war, things are difficult. It says on the third day she had nothing to trade. Her shoulders ached from the two babies that she had on a scarf. She had a little bit of food, I think a cooking pot, and she was delirious with pain and fever. Now she's a nurse, so she knows the symptoms. She has dysentery, okay? And that's a fatal disease for people. It can certainly happen during times of war when sanitation and drinking water are not at their best. And the babies they're doing as best as she can, but she's really worried that she will not live to take care of the babies. And she even begs people when they're coming by on a cart, please take my babies, I beg you. And so we really see how horrible war is, that she's so ill that she's going to have to leave her children at the side of the road. I mean, it's just not something that mothers do, but she's so ill, she knows that she's almost on death's, doorstep. And so when the road grew quiet, she tore open the lining of her dress and stuffed jewelry under the shirt of one baby and money under the other. She reached into her pocket and drew out the photos of her family, the picture of her father and mother, the picture of herself and her husband on their wedding day, and she wrote on the back of each the names of the babies and the same message. Please care for these babies with the money and valuables provided. When it is safe to come, if you bring them to Shanghai, the Lee family will be glad to give you a generous reward. And she signs her name and her husband's name. So here again, photographs are really important. They're going to be a way that the daughters are able to, when they're older, identify that, yes, this was our mother because we were found with these pictures, okay? And she kind of succumbs to her illness. She wakes up in a American mission, this like mission, if you will, and she thinks she's in a Buddhist hell, which I thought was really quite interesting. And she does go back and desperately look for her daughters, but she just can't find them. She returns time and time again as much as she can to look for them. And they have been taken in by a very wonderful couple. Let me see here. They're pious people, a Muslim couple who believed the twin babies were a sign of double luck, and they were sure of this when later in the evening they discovered how valuable the babies were. She and her husband had never seen rings and bracelet like this, and when they admired the pictures, knowing the babies came from a good family, neither of them could read or write. And so that's why they weren't reunited, because they just didn't have the wherewithal to be able to read where to send the babies to. So it isn't until much later when a schoolmate of the mother is shopping at number one department store, she recognizes these two girls that look so much like their mother. She, introduces herself, and they are to be reunited. But unfortunately, the their mother is dead. So we get to the end of the story where everything kind of comes together. At this point in time, Jiang Mei seems to know a little bit more about her mother. I couldn't imagine being 36 and finding out something about my mother that was so transformative in her life, but she just never told me. I mean, I'm sure she's really starting to understand maybe why her mom didn't talk about China, why she, wanted to have this tradition but just didn't communicate it the way maybe she should have, that sort of thing. And so when we get here to the end of the short story, she comes off the plane and somebody shouts, she's arrived. And she says, and then I see her short hair, her small body, and that same look on her face. She has the back of her hand pressed hard against her mouth. She is crying as though she has gone through a terrible ordeal and we're happy it's over. So she's coming off the plane. She sees the two women, the stepsisters, but she thinks she sees her mother, which is really kind of interesting. that she would transpose her mom onto her stepsisters immediately, and says, I know it's not my mother, yet it is the same look she had when I was 5 and had disappeared all afternoon. Okay. And then so she recognizes, not mom, and she says, and now I see her again, two of her waving, and in one hand there's a photo, the Polaroid I sent them. And so she recognizes her stepsisters for who they are. And when they all meet, the first thing they do is recognize the person that's not there, their mother. And the one sister says, Meme Gendel says one sister proudly to the other, little sister has grown up. And so there is an age difference between the girls. And, to be the little sister, you just assume that they're very young, but here she is, 36 years old. And Zhang Mei says, I look at their faces again and see no trace of my mother in them. So she recognizes them for who they are, their own individuality. And she says, yeah, they look so familiar. And now I see what part of me is Chinese. It is obvious. It is in my family. It is my family, sorry. And it is in my blood. After all these years, it can finally be let go. So here she is able to embrace her Chinese identity, but it's through the referential of her family. Without them, she would have never been able to accept it. She had to learn about her mother's past, really have the warmth of this extended family, and then meeting these stepsisters that she just recently found out about. So this is an interesting short story in that the diaspora is part of the American tale, and yet so many times we don't recognize these individual stories as part of our American cultural identity. It's really hard to be an American and not know somebody in the diaspora, or to be even part of the diaspora yourself. I mean, most of us can only go back a few generations where this experience occurred. Some people can go back more, but most people it's just 3 or 4. So I wanted to talk about one last thing after my cuckoo clock goes off, and that is the discussion post that I wanted you to look at. This is the quiz. So we're going to go to the discussion post. Now I'm going to have you write on either AmyTan or June Lahiri. I gave you a quotation from the research. If you like AmyTan, you want to pick either this prompt or that one. But when you write the discussion post, it needs to be 2 fully developed paragraphs, 1 page. And you need to follow these guidelines for writing about literature. Let me see if I can pull those up real quick. So I want you to put the author's name and the title of the short story. Okay, also give me the year it was written, because 1989, 2008, lots of differences there. I need you to give me the controlling idea, like what part of the diaspora are you going to look at? Is identity crisis, liminal characters, being in between cultures? What exactly are you going to be looking at in the short story? And then I really need good thesis statements. I know some of you struggle with them. So I gave you 3 examples. I think this one probably works best with AmyTan and June Lahiri. Is AmyTan inviting readers into a culture so as to provide insights into that culture and dispel assumptions that outsiders might have? I think that really would work. So kind of work that into your thesis. And the other thing I want you to do is, this is an exercise in focus. I don't want you to talk all about the short story. Pick the 2 parts of the short story that work with your thesis statement and really just focus on 2 parts of the short story. Don't give me 10. Don't even give me 4. Just 2. If you give me any more than that, then you're just listing what happens in the short story, and I'm really looking at the meaning of what happens in the short story. I do want a direct quotation. This is going to be evidence of your ideas, to say, hey, this is where I'm linking my ideas to. And then also, I want you to interpret the quotation. I only know that you understand the short story if you explain it to me. It might be similar than the explanation I just gave you, but I still need you to explain it to me in your own words, okay? Do your best with APA documentation. When you look at these, the guidelines for writing about literature, I did give you an example right here. It's on Flannery O'Connor, who we covered last week, but it gives you a feel for what I'm looking for in the discussion post. And of course, if you have any questions, I have answers. Just give me an email. All right, I'm going to stop talking. Let me know if you have any questions. Take care.